One of the most awesome concepts that I have ever came across was one presented by Alan Watts, the British philosopher, British American philosopher. He lived from 1916 to 1973, November the 16th of 1973. So he was, he just turned 100 back a couple of years ago. Or would have turned 100 had he not died 40-something years ago. But Alan Watts, he has some great, let me just say this. I mean, there's a lot to say about him. Of course, it's kind of hard to figure out where to start. I've listened to a ton of Alan Watts' work. He's influenced me in all kinds of ways. And, there's many concepts I can talk about that he's thrown out. I mean, this guy was perpetually busy. He was perpetually studying and writing and speaking. He was very busy. Very, 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 very busy. Good busy person. Just creative, tons of material coming out. Not everything perfect, but I don't think it could be understood at his time, but it could probably be understood better now than it could then, probably. Because we had all these years to soak it up. But anyway, the one concept that I really love is the concept of the microscope. Because you put a microscope on something, that's what he says. It's like, well, it looks one way until you put a microscope on it, and then it looks another way. And, of course, what that means is it's very literal. If you want to look at it very literally, if you're a literalist, pragmatic person, you look at it and go, yeah, you put something up under a microscope and it's going to look different. You're going to see things that you can't see. Specifically when you really get down there 100 times and just anchor into something and look what's there. And it's, a lot of the times he talked about, to a large degree, microscopes help prove that there was no such thing as matter. There is no matter, that there was just form of some sort or the other. The further you went down, whenever your lens was out of focus, whenever your microscope lens were out of focus, then you would see fuzzy stuff. You would see matter, just matter, the stuff that used to be believed that everything was made out of. But now, as we've gone down further and further, and we've looked at things mathematically and and added all of that together and had some great experiments and such, you can see that things go down, 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 further and further and further and further. And then further and further down it gets, you don't find matter. The further you go down with the more sensitive that your testing materials come, the further down you see form. The further down you see life. Of course, that ties right in with other things that Alan Watts talked about, which was that something intelligent or something dumb could never produce something intelligent. And he was saying that in terms of the earth. Alan Watts was, of course, he was a British Anglican. In fact, he was a seminary student. I'm pretty sure he earned on his own a master's degree, and then I'm pretty sure he's been awarded doctorates. But he grew up and went to Canterbury School, and if you've listened to him speak about his youth, well, then he was raised like a lot of us were, taught a lot of the same things, well, as I was in a Methodist church, from what he said. You could tell, it's kind of angelic. He may be a little bit more strict, but I think that may have been also because of the times as well. And that Alan Watts was my grandfather's age. But he was raised in a similar space as a lot of us were, in that he was, highly Christian environment. But whenever he was younger, he suggests that that his mother, I believe it was, who worked with who was a teacher for, I believe, foreign diplomats that came to England, they would leave her gifts. And, a lot of people that came and stayed where she was at or that she helped teach, I forget the specifics, but they would give her presents from their land. And of course, Alan, he noticed from the gifts that he would receive and from, exploring art galleries and such that were near his house that have something that would have to do with, the Chinese or the Japanese or any other Asian cultures. And he learned later that by viewing that artwork, he was learning about their type of thought, their type of quote unquote, for lack of better words, religion. And it was because it was very different. It's kind of like later on he talked about Buddhism in a lot of his speeches and seminars and such being the religion of no religion. It's kind of like it's like you try to hide the fact that you're Buddhist, that you're Zen Buddhist. And it was kind of like what you would find in Matthew 6, where, Jesus is giving the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, when you pray, go ye therefore to your bedroom or to your closet, and you close the door and you pray. But when you pray, and when you go there, the reason why you go to your closet or your bedroom is because of the fact that, the pagans, he says at one point, they pray on the street so that everyone can see. And I tell you now, they've already received their reward. And of course, he gave similar things with, giving away things, or contributing to people with less than you, giving to the poor or what have you. Keep it to yourself. Blah 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 blah. If you listen to Matthew 6, the whole 6 it basically describes the religion of no religion. In other words, be religious, but don't show it. Don't brag about it. Well, anyway, so that's other key concepts from Mr. Watts. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that he was very much a Christian and was raised Christian and was even he was a chaplain at a university and held a post and was the spiritual leader for several universities, as I understand it, as I recall. And then, of course, later on in his life, in his 40s and 50s, he started looking at things more along the lines of, the Eastern thought. And I think he was particularly fond of Taoism and Hinduism and, of course, Zen Buddhism. He talked about all those great stories and mythos and examinations of life or ways to live life. So it's truly fascinating to learn about that person, and specifically to be able to take away things like the microscope concept. It's like whenever you're speaking and dealing with people, a lot of times, if you put things under a microscope, then you're looking at it differently. Of course, it's going to look different like that because it's been scrutinized from a very specific angle. And another way to talk about that, to show you a really great way of looking at that particular concept, putting it under the microscope, is by talking about the concept that Alan Watts put forth. He spoke about it in all of the speeches that I seem to recall hearing. And that's the concept of disturbed water does not calm down by hitting it with a flat iron or kicking it. In other words, if there's a mud hole sitting out in the yard that got made when the car ran through it, you're not going to get that water back clear again in that hole by going by there and hitting it with a hammer. What you will do is leave it alone. And of course, that ties into tons and tons and tons of other concepts that Watts spoke of inside of the ways of living in a way that these people understand things inside of Asia. And I think that he did it originally to understand his own religion. Because he's like, you don't understand the inside of the box if you don't understand the outside. You can't understand the inside if you don't understand what the outside of it is. So you got to get outside of the box. That's kind of where that concept was coming from these days, 30 or 40 years later. But from his perspective, it was another, Asian thought. It was very Chinese, actually, which is every inside has an out, every front has a back. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is, because all the good's right there, which goes back to Matthew 6. It's putting forth all this effort to show a particular thing. Why? It's seeking something now as opposed to later. And of course, all of these thoughts on life and theories and religions and such pretty much say to do that is don't burn your candle too bright. Don't make too much noise. Do wonderful, great things, but don't brag about it. Just keep it turned down, because it'll get you crazy. If you start doing really great things and you start this is what they say about Zen when you're learning it. You're learning about Zen. That's all you study about is good stuff, good stuff, good stuff. And that's whenever they say that you stink of Zen. And Alan Watts talked about that a great deal. And of course, obviously, whenever he talks about it, he knows, and you and I know, because he's talking about it, that is what happens with people that get any kind of religion. It's like, it's very, you're deep in it, and you're blah, 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 but it's easy to, you're deep in it, you're involved in it, that's all you think about, and you can't understand that someone else is somewhere else at that point in time. The religion of no religion. Hide it, do good things, but don't let everybody know about it. That's kind of one of the larger messages that came from that man. Of course, I already talked about the front and the back, and that's having to do with, you can think of it as a mountain. There's a dark side of the mountain, there's a light side of the mountain. One side is where things are clear, and there's a savanna leading down. The other side is a cliff, and there's a water's edge, and there's at that water's edge is, bad things indeed. Snakes and reptiles of every sort that come along will get ya. Because on that side there may be, amongst all that darkness, the lowest place, the place that water goes. May not be, though. You have to go there and explore for yourself. That's what I always say about, like, with thought like that, is that with the Alan Watts, and that's kind of what the topic is today, is that I'm just sitting here thinking, well, I was sitting up under a tree this morning. I was watching gnats fly around a tree. And then I'm out here this afternoon. It was really hot, like 95, and all of a sudden a little cloud blew over and blocked the sun out. And it got really nice up under this trees, and it's not as hot. The leaves are moving around in the wind, and it's not just hot wind, it's cool, it's nice. And I started thinking about, the good things. And of course, one of the good things for me is the time I was very stressed out in my life, and I started listening to Alan Watts. And of course, he's not your religious guy. He's the guy you go to help understand what you believe, or to put perspective around what the things about what you believe, and maybe help you understand what you believe. In other words, help you look outside of the box, on the outside of what your thoughts are, to see maybe something totally different. But, of course, there's all kinds of concepts that I picked up from him, and I've talked about several today, but there's many more. This guy was just always studying. He was studying psychotherapy. He was, any kind of a milieu of growth and change and technology. This guy spent a bunch of time talking about the future of communications, and he basically talked about the internet, of course, back then, and he has a whole seminar series on the future of communications. A really interesting thought leader, and of course, he's made a huge resurgence in the past few years, because I think people kind of soured on him, the way that religious thought was going in the United States of America. It's so divisioned and warlike, and it's just no agreement, but everybody agrees it is. So I think a lot of people have turned to Alan Watts over the years to try to put a spike down, even though he says don't do that. And that's one of his things is that we're learning more and more that life is not like hanging on a rock that cleft for me. It's more like floating in a river, which is what the other side of the English American thought is, which is the Eastern thought. Well, what's the other side of the Western thought is the Eastern thought. And it's like, if you know both sides, then you can probably make something in the middle and make it work better. And I think people need that kind of balance to understand really what they believe. Well, that's it. That's a little quick delving off into the world of Alan Watts, the thoughts and things that go on inside of a beautiful early fall day. I hope that wherever you're at, and he calls you an aperture through which the universe, another aperture through which the universe views itself. I hope that wherever you're at, you're having a great afternoon and a great evening or a great morning. Have fun. Be safe.